type them in the chat and precede them by a couple of question marks like this. I'm sending it to everyone. And if you'll put the question marks in there, then when we get close to the end, JP, do you prefer to answer questions along the way or at the end?
I'd actually, can everybody hear me okay? First off, everybody can hear me. All right, wonderful. I'd actually prefer to take them at the end. That way I just kind of make sure we get through all. We've got a lot to talk to. And when people ask me questions, I get on tangents, so yeah. It's better just to take it at the end, if that's okay.
That will be good. And ladies, I will try to keep an eye on the questions. And if any are repetitious, we'll cover the ones we can. And before we begin, let's have a prayer. And then I'd like to say just a few words to introduce. What do you like to be called? JP?
Yes, ma'am.
That's Robinson?
JP Robinson is fine, or just JP is fine.
JP, already. Let's pray, please, ladies and gentlemen. Lord, we're grateful for this opportunity and what an amazing technology. Thank you, Lord. I pray that you would get glory from it. And I pray that you would speak to us, to our minds, to our hearts, so that we can portray our characters realistically. And that will invite our readers in to receive that little message that we're trying to weave into the story, Lord. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Well, as I said, I don't know JP personally, but he is not only an amazing author of riveting fiction that has spiritual messages woven into it, but he also writes nonfiction books and what is your title? You're a PR person, right? A marketing guru? What are you?
I do a lot of marketing. I've been self-employed. I've done work for medical companies. I do a lot of different work in the ministry. It's very varied and diverse. So in the end, I just call myself a Christian who's trying to do the best he can.
Amen. Well, ladies, are we all ready? And everyone should be muted. I will mute myself also, except for JP. And like I say, put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end. I will also let you know, JP, when we have like 10 minutes left. You think that would be enough time for you to address questions?
That's perfect. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for that warm introduction. And I want to thank you guys all for coming, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I'm really excited to talk with you about this and to get started on this great topic. But before we do, I believe it was Pam had said, and I'm sorry if I didn't have that right, maybe it's Paula, I may have that name wrong, I'm sorry. But I'm new to the Kentucky Conference, and I want to thank all the amazing organizers that put this together. So it's kind of the first time we're getting to know each other. I've taught at a couple other different conferences, Philadelphia and different ones across the nation, but this is my first time with Kentucky. So I'm excited to be here and share some things with you, just to get to know each other a little bit better. I'm a husband and father, and I've been a public school teacher for a number of years. I've done a lot of work in the ministry. My wife and I run a Christian marriage ministry, fearlessmarriage.net. And on the marketing side, it's been a very adventure. I guess a great adventure would be the best way to say it. And I've been doing marketing for about 15 years for various businesses, organizations, and nonprofits. More recently in the writing field, I've been taking business practices and applying them, helping authors grow in their own writing endeavors. I have another class coming up tomorrow on turn your writing into a business. So I've been taking these strategies and helping authors grow. Logos Publications is my company. It's a publishing house that we've started out a little while ago. And we've been doing the very best that we can. Writing is one of my primary pastimes, if I could. As was mentioned, I do fiction and nonfiction, and we're working on getting a marriage book out there as well. So we've got a lot going on. I've been in journalism for a while. And one of the most amazing things that I really appreciate is this part about author research. And this is actually important because it's the spearhead or the foundation of the presentation that I'm about to share with you today. What I mean by author research is that in addition to helping clients and helping authors grow, one of the great things that I love doing is connecting with other authors. And these include Christie bestselling authors. These include, I think, various winners of various different awards, and the Christian and non-Christian side. And one of the things that I do with that is in talking with these authors or communicating with them is learning what strategies they're using in terms of their writing techniques, in terms of their marketing techniques, in terms of how they feel that they've grown best as authors, and they're okay with me sharing this information with you, my audience. So it's a great way for them to kind of get a little more, get their name out there. It's also a great way for me to share strategies with you that not only do I use, but strategies that other authors are using as well. From my side, just so you know, for my work, Publishers Weekly and other ones have found my work acceptable and so forth. So I'm coming to you with a couple different approaches and things here that I hope everyone will find meaningful. I want to point out right now, I'm not sure if Lisa Carter's in the audience here, but one of the work that we're going to be talking about is strategies we're going to be talking about in our presentation today is the fact is a lot of that information came from Lisa, and I'm going to share some of her perspectives. So I definitely encourage you to check out her work as an author, as well as the others that we're going to discuss today. So this presentation is a collaborative one. You're not just going to hear my perspectives, but it's four of us, four authors, myself, Lisa Carter, Dan Walsh, and Ronnie Kendig. I'm bringing their perspectives as well to answer two critical questions. Why is it important to create realistic male characters that appeal to both men and women? And secondly, how do we create male characters that resonate? So we're going to share four perspectives in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to start off, as I mentioned, I will stop. They'll let me know about 10 minutes before if you have questions and thoughts. I'd love to get to them. I do talk a little fast and I have a lot to share. So I'm going to let you know up front that if there's anything I don't get to, or if I don't get to your question, this recording, I think they have it here. You can also get the slides if you sign up on my website to my author email list. Just hover over the For Author tab, and I'll be happy to email this over to you. But beyond that, you can connect with me on Facebook or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that I can. All right, so where are we going? Yeah.
Before you begin, if I understand correctly, your presentation, the slides, and the chat will all be in the recordings that will be on our website.
Perfect. So if that works for you, feel free to get it. That's totally fine. That's perfect. All right. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about raw numbers. We're going to talk about why it's important to write in a way that appeals to men. We're going to talk about personality, how to blend variety, aggression, and appeal. We're also going to talk about the presentation of our male characters, including their dialogue and action beats, how to make that effective to your audience, and because it is different from the way that women speak in many cases. And we're going to have questions at the end, to take the conclusions and so forth. So we're going to keep those four things and jump right in on that note. So let us begin. Timothy Dalton, I'm sure many of you have heard of him, actor, etc. I'm not saying he's an ideal man, but he had a quote here that I want to share with you. He said, "You can't relate to a superhero, to a Superman, but you can identify with a real man who, in times of crisis, draws forth some extraordinary quality from within himself and triumphs, but only after a struggle." And I've highlighted here in blue some things that I think I really want to share with you to keep in mind as we go through, because we're going to discuss this in more detail. Normally, if this was a face-to-face session and I was doing a one-on-one with you all like we typically do in conferences, I would make this kind of a time for us to think and share together our perspectives on what the real man is. Because this is a virtual conference, I would ask, I'm going to bypass that part in the interest of time. But I do want you just to think in your head, what characterizes the ideal man in your perspective? And what you would realize is that if we were to share, we would realize that the ideal man, or the way that we think a man should be, is different based upon our own perspectives. Our opinion of the ideal man is shaped by our examples in our own lives. It's shaped by experiences that we've had, positive or negative experiences that we've had in our life. And it's also shaped by external influences, the things people have said, other people's experiences, other people's examples. So everyone's opinion is going to be in a lot of different ways different, but we can look overall and say, okay, what are some holistic things that readers want to see and that are working, that authors can use to help present information in a realistic and applicable way. So let's swing over to raw numbers here. Why am I even doing this? As was mentioned, a lot of authors are female, and that's totally fine. Especially in the Christian industry, there are a strong number of female authors, and that's fine. But what we're seeing a growing trend in increasing numbers of male readers. And with one of the things, I was talking to Jeanette Wendell, who's a great friend and writing colleague. I don't know, some of you may or may not know her out here in our area. But I was going back and forth by email with her and saying, Jeanette, do you think that this is even something to talk about? Is this something that we should actually approach as Christian authors? And she was really saying, yeah, that's a great thing to talk about, because the fact is what we've realized is that male readers, because they want something to read and the numbers are increasing, what we need to do is either, if we don't present them with real information and with great stories that are relevant, applicable, and inspiring, then we risk losing them to secular authors. And that's not really the way we want to go. We have a prime opportunity here. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to present, Frank is not a real person, but I want to just present Frank to you as a hypothetical situation, just to let you understand, share it more clearly, the relevance of this scenario. Frank is a guy whose son has come to him and said, Dad, for school, I need to do a project. I need to just read a book and discuss it with my dad. And I need you to be able to compare your story that you've read or something you've read recently with me. And really, Frank over here hasn't read anything lately because Frank doesn't have time to read, number one, but number two, he can't find anything interesting to read. And this Frank's story over here is actually more common than what you might think. So as Christian authors, we have a prime opportunity, and I feel an obligation, whether we're male or female, to write stories that will resonate with male characters. And that's why I think it's great that you all are here today, because it shows that you have the desire to do just that. Beyond that, men matter, as we know, and there's an increasing number of male readers, as I said, so you'd miss out on a prime audience right there. But we've also seen from our ongoing research that men are more likely to read if the characters that are presented in the stories are strong male characters. And that shouldn't surprise us, but that's, researchers have to prove the obvious. But the truth is that that's something that we're facing. There's tons of research out there to support that. Also, boys need positive role models. As society shifts and we see changes in our own, in the world, the way society runs, we need to be able to present to our younger men and boys positive role models that can inspire them to become godly men, good leaders, effective in a lot of the ways that they run. And they're not getting that. They're really not getting that from a lot that's put out there. Even in the school world, as a teacher, I can't tell you how many times we see students that are developing apathy, boys who are not interested in reading at all because there's just nothing that they can connect to and that they find that's presented to them. So finally, from a financial aspect and a readership aspect, we find that the YA markets are booming. And so you have the opportunity to create a lifelong connection. If you're a YA author, you have the possibility to connect and create a lifelong connection with future readers from a very young age. So let's keep that in mind. And I already mentioned this aspect of the risk of losing them to secular authors. Let's go further. In the research, what we have, we've often had this speculation that men aren't reading as much as women, but Pew Research Center in 2019 did a really neat study as to who hasn't read a book in the past 12 months. You can interpret this data how you want to, but all that I want to point out from this slide is that the difference between male and female readers, those who have not read a book in the past year, is actually only 10%. So we are seeing that there is not as big of a gap, perhaps, as we would think. Some might have thought, well, 90% of readers are women and there are hardly any men in there, but that's really not the case according to what the data is telling us. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward. All right, so what I want to do now, as I mentioned, these four wonderful authors here, these are vetted authors. They're great to have personal connections with them. And again, Elisa's here at this conference, I believe. I don't think Ronnie's here, but they're great authors, and I encourage you to pick up all of their books. And so I reached out to them, to Dan and to Ronnie and to Lisa, and asked them, can you all share your perspective with me? I sent them some questions that I wanted them to answer, and then fused their answers, or I should say, I guess, my perceptions of their answers together into this PowerPoint as well as my own. So that way we are getting a great variety here. Okay, so I hope that's okay. So the first thing we want to talk about is personality. How do we get the personality in a way that will resonate with readers and so forth? So I'd like to make sure to emphasize the importance of personality, I like to compare our book to being a vehicle. It takes us places, it transports us, it drives us, etc. But if we want that book to go anywhere, the personalities of the characters within, that's the key. The personality of your male character is the key to getting that book, to keeping that book moving and engaging your readers. So if we want to express, just to understand why personality is so important, we need to remember that your personality of your character, of your male characters in particular, is going to drive the action of that plot. So you really want to spend time building up a really effective male personality, because that's what's going to drive his decisions. That's what's going to help to make the determination between whether or not he kills somebody, or whether or not he goes and he prays, or whatever your story line is. The personality is what's also going to fuel the reader's feelings about your male characters. So the reader's emotions about whether or not they like your guy is in large part determinant upon the personality of that character, not just his decisions, but the way he is overall. And that makes sense because fiction reflects real life. And in real life, personalities determine whether or not we like people. Another thing that I want to keep in mind is personality is so important because that's going to influence the level of relatability. Whether or not a reader can connect with your character on an individual level, which of course influences your reviews overall. So let's take that a step further. How can you create a killer male personality? And I got to say, I realized after I created this that this could come across the wrong way. I don't mean killer personality in a negative way. I mean in a positive way. How can you create a character that's really outstanding, a male character that's astounding? So let me share with you the perspectives of some of these authors. Ronnie had said, again, I'm going to kind of make this disclaimer before I go further. These are my perceptions of their answers. I've taken what they said and shaped it and consolidated it. So if you're communicating directly with them, they may word things a bit differently, but I've tried my best to be true to what they've said. So Ronnie suggests that you model a male character off of real life, off of the people inside your life, or the people that you know, people that you experience and see in your life's journey. One of the things that really stood out to me from Ronnie Kendig, and I think many of you know Ronnie's a Christie Award-winning author and so forth. One of the things that she had said was build off of stereotypes, because basically stereotypes are someone's ideal, but it's an ideal that's been exaggerated, an ideal that's been done so much till it becomes commonplace. So she's saying look at a stereotype, but then build your character so it's not a cardboard character, but build off of it. Dan suggests that that a good writer, when building a male character, shows fears and struggles on the part of that male character. And if you think back to that quote from Timothy Dalton at the beginning, you'll see that this is carried over here in Dan's perception as well. We want to show the fears and the struggles that a male character is going through. And as a guy, I can tell you that that's definitely true. We don't like to have these kind of, we're all out there, and we are, I'm hearing background noise. Is everybody hearing me okay? Everybody okay? Okay, great. We don't want to have this kind of thing that a guy is triumphing in every situation without a struggle, because we men do have struggles and we do have fears. Whether or not we show it or to what degree we show it, that's a little different. Ronnie again says to vary personality types. So if you have multiple males in your plot, you want to make sure that those males are different one from another. And that's great because that can allow you to connect with a variety of different male readers or female readers in your audience. So it's important to vary those personality types. Lisa Carter said this, and I backed this exactly in harmony with mine, as my thoughts as well, that you want to write men as they are, not as women would like them to be. And I think out of everything I've said here on this slide so much, I want to really emphasize that. It's very easy for authors to write people, and for male or female authors to write characters the way that we, I'm gonna take a step back. It's very easy for female authors to write male characters as they would like them to be. And I don't mean that in a bad way or an offensive way, but it's very easy, especially in the romance genre and some of these others. It's very easy to write a character that is.
Hey, JP, let me interject for a minute. Norma, can you please mute your microphone? Norma Poor, can you please mute?
Are we good?
Jean, can you mute Norma? I don't think she's hearing us, but we're getting a lot of feedback.
That's okay. It just gives you time to read the slide a little more. Are we good to go, Greg? All right. So it's very easy for us to write characters, or for women to write characters as they might like them to be, but that doesn't necessarily represent the current reality or represent a true to life image of a character. And remember, fiction is again about recreating real life with a purpose so that our readers can empathize with those characters. Lisa also says to focus on their profession. So for her male characters that she creates in her stories, she tends to give them, and many times, a masculine, what we'd consider a masculine traditionally profession. And that allows you to build their character or their personality, because their profession that they choose is going to be a reflection of their personality, what kind of a person they are. So that can be a helpful starting point, their profession, because it can give you a lot of opportunity to show different aspects of their character through their work, through their personality, through their work. So keep that in mind. That can be very helpful. From my perspective, I believe that it's great to have you want to have a male character that is respectable, a male character that the reader can respect. However, that does not need to be the case at the beginning of the story. That can come along through growth, through growing in Christ, through going through whatever experiences you have in life. But by the end of your book or your series, you want to have, if you want to appeal to male readers, have the guy be someone he can look up to, someone he can respect or want to emulate. Next one I have here is from Lisa, saying you want to react to situations. You want male characters that can react to situations with actions and not just words, because men are problem solvers. They're kind of hardwired to be that way. So we want to make sure we're reflecting that in our books, whether or not it's the protagonist, the antagonist, that's up to you, but you want to have them react with action. Now, what should we not do? Let's swing over to the not side. So we don't want to create weak men. If you want to appeal to male readers, don't create weak men. Don't create men that are saved by a woman in their life, or create a man who is wishy-washy in some ways. Because what you're doing, I know that that may go against the grain sometimes of social messages and what we're inundated with, but we want to talk honestly, and we want to really be able to express that it kind of cheapens the value of the man in the character as a whole. And you want to appeal to your male readers, not turn them off. So even no matter what your life's experience, or no matter what, be very careful with how you word that. Don't create cardboard characters. As I mentioned over here, Ronnie advocates building off of stereotypes, but she also mentions that you don't want to create characters that are exactly in that mold. You want to build them off. That's, remember, someone's ideal, but it's not the way your character should be. So I don't want you going away thinking I'm advocating going for stereotypes, but you want to start there, but build. I hope that makes sense to everybody. If it does, kind of just nod or give me a thumbs up or something so I can kind of see that's coming through. All right, great. Don't belittle men in your writing. And I think many of you are mature enough writers not to do that. But sometimes, I just want to express this out there. You want to be careful not to belittle men or to vent against men in your writing. You want to, again, remember the goal is to appeal to male readers as well. Be careful, according to Dan, not to create overly macho men or men that are overly stereotypical, as we said. You want to create men that are relatable, not men that are just, all out there in that sense. Lisa and myself agree that you don't want to create men who think or act like women, because we are different, and we must remember those differences and use those differences to enhance our story and to connect with readers of both genders. I'm going to show you an example later on. Lisa advocates not creating men who speak or react like women, and that can be either through dialogue, action beats, perception. You don't want to do that. You want to remember, again, the key thing to writing a successful male character is remembering that they are different than women. And if you're a female, then what you need to do is write across your gender. And that's okay. You need to be able to do that to successfully create a world of people that, that we're creating here as well. So be careful with that. Don't make guys overly romantic. We get these stories sometimes where the guy is he's working out for 10 hours a day, and then he's just got the right words to say he looks great, and then he's got the right words to say to the right female at just the right time. Make him make mistakes, make him stumble in his speech. He's human, so especially if you're writing romance, you want to make sure that guy is not just knows the right thing to say just at that right time, and she swoons, or it's not realistic, it's not true to life, it's not what people experience, and it's probably not going to earn you many points in people's esteem as to how they enjoy your book. So let's go from there now. All right, so Lisa, in a vast and gracious tide, she had this statement here, and I'm not going to read it. You all can read it for yourself. But as you're reading it, my message to you is think like a man when you're writing this book. When you're writing your book, think like a man. And I really appreciated the insight that she shared in her interview, especially this part that I have in blue. She said the character describes the situation as vanishing in a maelstrom of jagged metal. And what I like to challenge you to do, not now, we don't have time to share now, but just think about this in your own time and perception, and just as you look at this PowerPoint again or whatever, think to yourself, how would a woman have described the situation? If you're writing a male character, you need to be in that man's head. He's a Green Beret, so he's obviously jagged metal is a part of his life. A storm, jagged metal, these are elements to which a man can relate. If your character is a politician or if your character is a bank owner, you're going to have him compare situations in terms that he can understand, but yet they've got to be terse, they've got to be to the point, very vivid and straightforward in that sense. And the reality is, because you would compare it as a man, he's going to compare that to in a different way than perhaps a woman would, even in the same profession. Even if it's a female banker, she might compare life or whatever the situation is in a different way. So take a step back and think and contrast this. How can we do it? Because successful writers are able to write across our gender. We have to do that in order to really get our point across and make our character true to life. All right, so let's talk now about how to ramp up the reader appeal. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I hope I'm not going too fast, but I want to kind of get to everything today. And I never have enough time for these things. So let's ramp up the reader appeal. How do we do it? Well, first, I'm pulling these again from the different authors. Make men that are problem solvers. We do this through our mindset and through our dialogue that we show. Make him a realistic role model. Make him someone that others can look to at the end of your novel or from the beginning. You may have different men in your story. You may have a father figure. You may have an immature kid. You may have whatever, but make him role model. There's got to be a male role model in there, someone that can inspire. Make him respected by others. And you can do this through scene illustrating, through sharing situations and scenarios that are happening in this character's life. Make him, through your scene illustration, also show his kindness, also show his positive traits. Make sure that your character has these aspects in him. And if you're doing kind of like I've done in a book I'm going to share with you, a prodigal kind of coming, these are situations that and characteristics traits that may exist in potential form, but they're not going to really come out in that story until later on as your plot evolves. But if you're starting off with a spiritually strong or what we call a good man, an ideal man, make sure these are present through their dialogue, through scene illustration, etc. And then the next segment I have down here is very important. It's his interaction with the women in his life. Because again, you're appealing to male and female readers as your goal. Okay, so you want to make sure he has the respect for women in his life, and you can do this through interpersonal scenes, through showing his interaction, maybe this thoughtfulness, a thoughtful gesture he might do, something else that's remembering a special event or whatever else. Show that respect, maybe through dialogue, whatever that he has for the woman in his life. However, I want to caution you, in trying to appeal to a male reader, make sure the woman is deserving. Make sure she's got a good, strong character as well, a great personality as well, so that the respect level makes sense, it's logical, and it flows. Sometimes what we see happening is because authors want to make their character, the male character, likable, they'll have him going and showing respect and showing it out in just kind of deference to females in the story that aren't really, I don't want to say deserving of it. Their character and personality and character and choices are not of the best. So you want to be very careful not to try too hard. Make it natural, just like in real life. Respect is earned, male or female, respect is earned. And our character, you want to make sure we're reflecting that in real life. And again, that can be also through character growth. Maybe he doesn't start this way, but as he grows, his interactions with women should become more positive as he goes along, and you're moving it along, your story along that way. All right, I'm going to introduce to you Malcolm. I'm not really doing this for promotional purposes, but I want you to understand that what I'm telling you works. So Malcolm is one of those guys that, as I mentioned, starts off a really, not a good guy, he's not a good guy. But as our story and our series progresses, his growth and what he ends up becoming is really what makes the difference. So we start seeing these characteristics coming through in the story as it's going along. And so that's what I'm talking to you about. All right, let's move on. So now, what do men want? What do men want when they're looking at a text? Well, at a book. What would make a man want to pick up your story? Well, first of all, according to Lisa, men want immediate problem immersion. We want to be thrown into the story. And I loved that. I absolutely loved that. We want to be thrown into the plot, into the story, not finding the story happening on page 5. We want to get right into the action. We want to have respect. We want to have relatable characters that we can connect with, just like anyone. We want to also see guys that have wisdom and experience. And I actually started to compile this. I actually just went to readers, and started asking male readers, well, what do you want to see in a book? What do you want to see? What drives you? I know I have my perception, but I'm an author, so I'm a little bit, biased, I guess. But from you as a reader, What do you want to see? Well, we want to see wisdom, experience, relatable characters, respect. We want to see showers, people who do things, not talkers. Okay, we want to see men who are masculine, men who have a reasonable form of aggression, depending on their profession, what they're doing, etc. But we want to see men that have a clearly defined masculinity. And I think this is extremely important given the current dynamics of our world and our nation in regards to gender and so forth. It's extremely important to have a clearly defined masculinity in your book by male readers. You want to have guys that have flaws, but that have self-confidence enough in them to actually rise above that flaw or do something, take action, and make themselves better. If I could summarize everything in one word, it would be real. Men want men who, in books, who are real. Not an idealistic portrayal, but a man as he is. So a lot of guys, maybe dads who are single dads or situations like that, balancing life and juggling all these things. If you're writing a story along that line, you want to show the struggles. You want to show the internal conflict, maybe the guilt, whatever else is going on. We want things to be real. All right. So a theme or message. This is what men want, according to Lisa. A theme or message that's woven within strong, realistic portrayals of men that incorporate plenty of action, dialogue, adventure, and utilizing problem solving. Because the reason this is so impactful for us as men is because when we're looking at a book or looking at a story, we want to see ourselves as we are or as we should be. And I've seen that where there is a male character that has influenced another and actually pointed that person into making better life decisions based on the male, actually in terms of parenting, based on the male character in one of my books. And that is so amazing to see that the male character, people can resonate and actually learn and draw from it, because really that's what we're looking for. That's the heart of why we do what we do. All right, so I asked these authors just to give you guys I guess a point of reference. I asked them, which one of your books has the best male character in it? And for Lisa, it was Under a Turquoise Sky. In your opinion, which of these, in the opinion of these authors, these books best represent the men that they create? Under a Turquoise Sky, for me, In the Midst of the Flames, for Dan, When Night Comes, for Ronnie, Conspiracy of Silence. And these are the ones, again, so you can go check out any of these books, if you want, or all of them, but I just thought I would share with you, since I'm talking about this and expressing all of our opinions, I wanted to share with you where we feel that our best men shine, as it were. All right, so let's talk about presentation. How do we make our guys look? Well, as an author, you want to make sure that the male character you're presenting has a appearance and a modus operandi, a method of operation that is relatable and desirable by the females in your audience. You must be careful about that, because the truth is, we do know that the majority of fiction readers are women. So as a female author, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, that's great. But what you want to do is you need to find that way of bringing that balance to appeal to the women, but yet also turning around and making sure that the guys are being, they're happy with what you're writing. So with that in mind, if you are a romance writer, which is a very popular genre in fiction, Dan says, make them more Jason Bourne than Rambo, so you want to keep that kind of, I guess, like a classiness or an appeal to it instead of just all out there. Now, if your character is designed to be like a Rambo, then hey, that's good. Go ahead for that. You know what you're writing. But the point of the matter is you got to keep that balance. For me, it's true. Keep your character true to your character. Keep his appearance true to your character. If he's a soldier, if he's whatever it is, keep it true to character, but find ways to balance that with appeal. And I've created villains that were really terrible, and yet they've appealed to female audiences, because it kind of depends on how you create them and what you want to do. Okay, dialogue and action beats. Let's talk about that. For men, the tone is going to be more terse. I know there are exceptions, but I'm speaking generally here. Men don't tend to be as verbose in our language and so forth as women in terms of describing. So we're more direct overall. So you want to make sure that when you are writing, you are stepping away from your normal way of communicating, or from your own way if you happen to be that way. If you're a more direct, straight person in terms of your speech, well, that's fine. But you want to make sure that you're capturing the mindset of your character. So he's going to probably be more terse. He's going to give more flat descriptions. And I actually wrote a blog post about this the other day on our marriage ministry website. It was kind of funny. I asked my wife in a picture of our son, I said, what color is our son wearing in the shirt? And she gave me cotton blue, I think was the word, cotton blue. And I said, I would have simply described this as blue. I would have just said blue in that regard because it's all blue. I know there are various shades of it, but it was really interesting because we were talking about this with someone else, and the description is that a woman might describe a dress or something as amethyst, but a man will just probably describe it as purple. So unless he has significant reason to just go into describing it as amethyst. And again, I realize that there are exceptions and so forth, but we're here to learn how to, in a general manner, and you can apply it to your characters as you see fit. You want to make sure your action beats are appropriate to gender. Men don't express surprise, for example, the same way that women do. A woman might be more likely to put her fingers across her chest like this. A man might narrow his eyes and step forward. So you want to watch your action beats to make sure that they are reflecting not only the need for not only the need of the scene at that time, and not only the plot, but also the gender of your character. And when I'm working with authors and doing critiques on their books, I remember I flagged this in a certain work I was working on. I had to tell the author, look, you really got to go back and watch how you're projecting this man, because he's using words to describe situations that normally a guy would not use. Most guys may not describe something in terms of cute, especially being a military man. It didn't really, the dialogue wasn't appropriate to what he was doing. So you want to be very careful about that. Again, there are exceptions, but we're talking general terms here. So here's my point here, right? Books that are for women. I wrote this book for women with a female audience in mind, obviously. And my wife was the one that was really helping me a lot with the action beats, whatever, right? But I had a lot of guys like this book, and I was confused. I was happy. I was not so confused, maybe is not the right word, but I was a little surprised. But what I realized from that experience was that books that are written for women can still appeal to men. And how do we do it? It depends on how you create the male characters. Even if your target audience is female, even if it's a romance book, this is like the one and only time I've ever delved into historical romance, but even if your book is a historical or is any kind of romance, or whatever you're writing, it can still definitely appeal to a male audience if the male character is relatable to you, to the characters inside. Many of you may have read Francine Rivers' that book. It's about the girl out west. I forget the name of it at the moment, but it's the girl out west. You probably know what I'm talking about. She's like a prostitute kind of story, whatever else. And Redeeming Love, I think is the name of it. Redeeming Love, I think that's the name. And I remember my sister had that book, and when I was younger, a teen, I said, I'm going to steal my sister's book. You know, boys, we have nothing better to do, right? So I took her book, whatever, and started reading this thing, and I will tell you, I loved it. I actually loved a lot of things that were in that book, and the reason was not because of the girl so much, but I understood the guy. The guys in that book were what hooked me and drew me into that story. So again, I would classify that as being a book written for a female audience. I don't know about you, but it can still appeal to men. So you want to be careful, all right? And take advantage of that, rather. All right, so that's a lot. I want to wrap up what I've said and then turn it over to questions. So to summarize, men matter. So cater to male readers, okay, for the reasons we discussed. Secondly, we want realistic, strong, but flawed characters. Characters we can look up to, but characters that share struggles like us. For characters who have maybe been through relationship issues or whatever the case may be, you decide what your plot is, but make them connectable to male men. Keep your presentation of those characters authentic, true to life, but make them suitable to your plot, but also make sure that you're working and you're writing in a way that the men in your audience don't feel belittled or slighted or overly idealized. Just keep it true, keep it real, really, really real. All right, and remember that if your book has strong male characters, even if it's written for females, you can also still appeal to male readers. And that puts you in a position as an author to have a tremendous power and radically increase your reach. Really, as I was thinking this morning, listening to Bob's keynote address this morning, he said that success, we want to have your work being read, and truly don't limit your book. Even if it's written for a female audience, if you're writing romance, whatever, remember you can reach others and you can share the positive messages that are on your heart simply by tweaking the male characters and making them so that they're written to connect with the male readers in your audience. All right. So, I'm going to pause here. If we have questions, I don't know how we handle this here, but if you want to read some out, whatever, I'll be happy to take them.
Okay, I have some questions that have come through the chat box, and if you have others, let us go through these first. And we do have plenty of time, JP. You're right. You do
great.
talk fast.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm always saying I never have enough time. So.
Yeah. Okay, The first question was about tips, which I think you may have already answered this one. I think you have, but this listener wanted tips for making dialogue sound more male than female. And I know that you went over some of those things.
I did, but I can add one or two more. In addition to keeping the dialogue kind of more straight, choppy, to the point, more direct, if depends on the scene. So if you're in, let's say, a fight scene or something, keep that dialogue even more terse. If it's something that's an action, remember the guy's going to be probably more physically showing his emotions than he would if you were female. So he may do something, if it's a happy emotion or whatever else, he may express that more physically. So ramp up the action beats and keep the words in perspective. I would say emphasize the physical reaction versus instead of the verbal as much, if that makes sense.
Does to me.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to ask you to kind of interpret this question for us.
Sure.
She says, what if the male in your book has a female profession like counseling and teaching?
Beautiful question. I think that's great. And I will tell you this too. I think that what you're going to do interpreting your profession, it should reflect the character, the personality of that character. So I would assume, I'm a teacher myself, so we definitely have, I think, more of a caring, I guess, if I know that might sound terrible, but we have a very caring we're nurturing kind of a role, right? So what I would say is use that to your advantage. The character should definitely be someone who is more verbose, someone who is used to using words in an effective way, someone who has more of a healing. I would make that character probably the wise one, the voice of wisdom in the story or something on that regard. It kind of depends on where you want to take that character, but I would definitely make that one in a position to offer wisdom if he's not already wise. And if that doesn't answer your question, just pop a follow-up into the chat.
Okay. Next question. How can we avoid making the male characters, controlling, not macho, and commanding rather than strong? There were several questions and comments that were not questions, which I think we are confusing a strong male with a controlling or macho kind of male. There were quite a few comments about women not wanting to read about strong men and strong men not being good role models. So maybe you could address that terminology.
I can. I think that this is where you're going to have to kind of make I don't want to say a compromise in that sense, but let me start with answering the direct question first of all. Strong men are men who are resilient. They are men who don't get overwhelmed by life's problems. They are men who take their responsibilities seriously and approach life with a more serious perspective, I would say. Not necessarily their personality is serious, but they're serious about life and its issues. In terms of commanding and so forth over there as well, it really depends on what the situation is. You know, if you are talking about a guy who is responsible, let's say a fire chief or something, who has to lead a team or whatever else, then he should be in charge of that situation and controlling that situation so that everyone gets out of the building safely. You know, that's kind of the way you want it to go. In regards to his interactions with women, now this is where you're going to, which I presume is where the question is going. This is where you're going to have to be very careful, because to say that that a strong man is not a good role model for a boy, you want to be very careful with how you portray that. You can have him assuming his responsibilities in the home, taking that very seriously. I think that's kind of that's the direction that I'm saying will appeal to, is something we need to consider, because you know, you're in writing, you want to cultivate and bring about a character that can inspire men/boys in positive directions. You don't necessarily you don't want to have your men in your novels as being obviously abusive or being overly domineering or things like that. You don't want to do that. And I don't think that would appeal to female or to male readers. That's just not the direction you want to go. But you do want to make sure you keep that balance. I think that would be my best answer to that question. And without looking at specific novels, whatever else, it's kind of difficult to say. But in general, I would say a strong man is a man who responds to situations and life's adversity in a positive manner. I would say it's a person who takes his responsibility seriously, depending what they are. And I would say that he's a good team player. And if it's a married situation, he's a good team player. He does what, knows what he's supposed to do and does the very best that he can, but keep him in an avenue that he can grow and show humility as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so. If it doesn't, please add, give us another question in the chat. I am still watching the chat box.
Sure.
The next question is similar, but he uses the term alpha male. How do you write an alpha male? Maybe you need to define that for us. If alpha males are not the best role models.
Well, let me jump in there really quickly, because alpha male, by alpha male, I presume you mean kind of like what we call a He-Man, kind of out there and, gung-ho kind of.
Rambo, I guess.
But there are stories where Rambo's necessary. I mean, it depends really what you're writing. If you're writing a book, if I'm going to go back to a police officer or military or whatever else, I mean, if the guy by nature and his profession is a very much of a very kind of more aggressive situations and scenarios that he's going to be confronting, then it would make sense to have a male character that is very aggressive, etc. But you want to watch how you do it. The whole thing is, again, balance. You want to create a character that may be, hey, this is what we're doing, this is the way we're going, and for good or for bad, depending on what you're trying to show by your plot, his decisions are either good or they're bad. But what you want to do is in his reactions with other people, and if I was writing a story like that with a female, to cater to the females in the audience, I would definitely turn around and make his interactions with the women in his life not so aggressive, if that makes sense. And I think that it just really depends on what you're trying to present and what point you're trying to make. But keep balance in there. He can definitely be assertive, but I would make sure that in his relationships with the opposite gender, that he is tender, tender and knows how to operate in respect and all these things, that dynamics that we believe should be there.
So definitely we want to lean toward the men being assertive rather than aggressive in
Absolutely.
his relationships.
Absolutely. Okay? I think that's a great way of clarifying it. Yep. Assertive is good. I would not make him aggressive in his relationships, especially with the females in his life. I don't think that sets a good message at all.
If I could interject, I don't want to speak on behalf of all men everywhere.
Right.
But, I spent 8 years in combat zones in my lifetime. And one thing that bothers me is the constant trope of the crazy vet.
Yeah.
Every vet you read about, every time you have a vet that's portrayed on the screen, he's got, debilitating PTSD and is often abusive. And this is just a trope. And, if you're writing a trope, like the absent-minded professor or the crazy vet or the barbaric bully, you might want to just examine your character, because it's coming off as very flat.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point to bring out, Greg. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I think, as we look at the stereotypes that we have out there and the things that have been cut and presented over and over and over again, it's really time for us to sit back and examine how can we tell our story with a fresh perspective by breathing fresh life and approaches into our characters. So you may have a perfectly functioning story with a combat soldier who does not suffer from PTSD or anything like that at all, and is not abusive in his marriage or relationship. Just find another angle to your story and bring out something fresh. I agree.
Thank you. And the next question I have is, what if the woman in the story is the major influence that helps the protagonist straighten out his life? How can you handle that in a way that's realistic?
I think that's wonderful. And I think that what would happen is have him lean on her. My suggestion would be to have him lean on her for advice in terms of dealing with situations, especially for a time, but then have him grow so he's applying the principles she taught him into his own situations. So take the things he's learned from her into his own reality, day-to-day situations, and using that information that he's learned or the lessons he's learned to apply directly to his own situation. Because you do want to have character growth. You don't want to have him constantly leaning back. That's not healthy emotionally or spiritually. We want to have him take those lessons, learn, grow, and be able to apply to handle life on his own. That's a great question.
Thank you. Okay, we have like 12 more questions here. Okay.
Glad I stopped early.
Yeah. This person says, I've read some romantic male leads who think overly much about their attraction to the female. Is this realistic? Outwardly, the character seems to be authentically masculine, but is this mental preoccupation realistic?
So I think what they're asking there is, do men that find themselves romantic focus on their own attraction? Is that what you're hearing in that question?
I think what she means is the man is dreaming about her and daydreaming about her and constantly thinking about this woman.
Yeah, I think the question goes to his attraction for her, and he's preoccupied with how attractive she is in his thoughts, in his private thoughts. Is that the question?
Jeanette, you might want to clarify that question for us.
Yeah, you can unmute, I think, and
Huh?
yeah, she can.
So the leads that I'm thinking of seem to have thought lives that sound a lot like the female leads in terms of kind of waxing romantic and, oh, look at the shape of her nose, and oh, every time I see her hair I can't concentrate. Is that realistic? Because outwardly, you know, there's the terse words, there's the action, you know, all of that stuff is okay, but I don't know how the thought life is realistic or not.
I wouldn't have him focus so much on that for a number of reasons. Number one, it'll make him seem like his attraction is purely sexual or physical, and that's not going to go over too well. He obviously as a man would notice her beauty and should appreciate that, but I think he should actually focus more of his attention upon her mind, her emotions, how she handles situations and these things, especially if it's a genuine attraction that's going to become a lasting relationship. But I think also too that there should be other elements to the story, other problems that are preoccupying his mind that he's trying to share. So every time they meet or at various points in his day, he can think about the character, absolutely, and he should think about her smile or her hair or whatever else it is, but it should not be the predominant dominating thought in his life, because it's not, you know, it's really not the case for a lot of guys. You know, we often do, contrary to what I guess Hollywood and different ones might per se, we often do, you know, think beyond the physical and really look deep into what a woman thinks and what she's like, and we value those things, especially again if it's going to be a relationship that's solid.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this question says, I have a male character who's been through a great deal of trauma since childhood. He's been emotionally damaged. He tends to shut down. He's strong, but he's damaged. How can I realistically show his behavior and growth through the story?
I appreciate that question. That's a great angle to take, and something that's not often talked about. I'd definitely show that he struggles a lot. Like there are situations that arise that sometimes he takes like a half step or a step forward, and then something happens that kind of shoves him back a step or two. And you might make your whole plot or a good portion of your plot centering, not the whole thing, but a good portion of your plot centering around his attempts to move forward and to find healing and peace. I would also make sure that there is someone who he can lean upon. And you may want to make this a female or male, depending on what your overall purpose is. But someone he can lean upon to actually continue to draw from and draw wisdom. And then this kind of goes back to an earlier question we had, where eventually he's applying whatever lessons he has learned, whatever he has drawn into the situation, so he can actually take those steps and move toward healing on his own. And really, truly, I'm assuming this book is geared for the Christian audience, his spiritual growth, his leaning on the Lord is what's going to actually enable him to take those steps forward and to become the man that he needs to be.
Thank you. This is a great question. This person is asking about the antagonist. We've been talking, I think maybe you should clarify that we've been talking about the protagonist in the story, that there can be some really bad guys. But she says, what if you want to have that in your story?
I love that question. And I do, I'm not doing it at this conference, but I did often teach a conference on Write 3D Characters. And I have a book that's out on there somewhere, just came out on that. And one of the things we talk about is making the antagonists realistic and good. So one of the things I advocate for people is this, I'm going to tell you this here, and it might sound very unorthodox, but it does work, okay? Create an antagonist that your audience can like to a certain degree. Don't put too much love on him, but because you don't want to confuse your audience, but create things in that antagonist that can be that can be kind of looked at sympathetically. from a sympathetic standpoint. It could be an abusive situation that justifies why he is the way he is, etc. But you don't want to avoid, you want to avoid, again, the stereotypical, okay, you're bad, so therefore you are evil and everything about you is evil. Every villain has a story. I mean, every villain has a reason he or she is evil. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that that antagonist has some of those positive traits that we're putting in there, but just very, very be careful with it, not to put too much into it. So I would maybe make him we think of an evil guy, depending on your story, we think of evil sometimes as being, you know, not shaving and whatever else. Well, which is more scary? A villain who is not shaving and stinks, you know, like he hasn't bathed in 10 months, or a villain who is clean cut, clean shaven, a great appearance, looks like a gentleman, talks like a gentleman, but in his heart is evil. You see, that's the one that'll actually kind of send more chills down your spine a little bit. So you can apply some of the positive characteristics to a protagonist, to an antagonist, but make their overall arching action evil. I think of Scar from the old, you know, from the Lion King when the cartoon came out, you know, years ago when I was a kid. You know, I honestly think, I'm not much of a Disney fan, especially these days, but I will tell you that I think that Scar was the best villain I had ever seen from a cartoon perspective.
We have 5 minutes. I do have one more question. Do you want it, or do you want to wrap things up?
I'm happy to take it quickly, and then we can just say goodbye. Yep.
Okay. How do men typically encourage or compliment each other physically? Do they slap on the back, or, you know, what are realistic things that men would do to encourage?
Great question. Short answer is it depends on the culture. Depends on the culture of the character involved. A lot of times guys will slap each other in the back, shake hands, say, you know, maybe give a hug, say, hey, great job, cheer, whatever else. But it depends on the culture that that person's coming from and then the subculture within that culture. So the short answer is there really is no one way. But physically does tend to be more, it's a North American, mainstream America kind of culture, physical interactions tend to be more popular. I'm from the Caribbean, you know, and that's, again, very common for us. We are very physical in expressing those kind of, at least in my part of the Caribbean, expressing our feelings that way. However, you want to sit down and do your research as to what this person is, because if he comes from a more conservative culture and reserved, then that may be a very extreme for him. It might just be a simple nod, might be what it's, you know, that might be all the affirmation he needs. So do your research into your culture, the subgroup of your character, and then you can go from there.
Thank you so much. I think we did hit every question, and we have just tons of compliments to you, and thanks for such a powerful presentation. And folks, please remember that the video itself, the presentation, the PowerPoint, and the chat should be available in the recording tomorrow night. So if you, like I was trying to write down every word, no, we can just screenshot it, folks, or like he said, his notes, or JP can send you his actual outline and so forth if you will go to his website. Absolutely. Thanks again.
My pleasure. I want to encourage you guys to take the plunge. Don't be afraid. Just jump out there, face it, and you will do amazing things. So on behalf of my son and I, thank you very much for being with us here today. Take care.
Hey, round of applause.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye, everybody.